Great to see you.
Here we are.
You look great.
I appreciate that. Likewise.
Very nice to see you. Let's give you
Cheers.
a little
Cheers.
tea.
Little
Cheers.
tea. Cheers. There you go. Excellent.
Both drinking tea today.
A little hot.
Little hot.
There we go. Ah.
Does a body good. Well, when I see men with beards, the first thing I like to do is start off with telling them their beard looks great. I'm one to compliment facial hair or hair in general.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah. You know, it's funny. I've had this for a long time and was told that I could not win elected office with a beard, and somehow I made it through.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I made it through.
Yeah.
I mean, like obviously the old way of thinking was that you got to shave for politics.
Not in California though, right? It's like a New York probably.
You know,
you would.
I
Suit and tie.
I think it's more now versus before. I just think it was like I think beards are much more in than they were.
I guess so. Yeah.
You know, I mean, just go back and look. Go back and look at movies from 20 years ago. You know, versus today. Like just a lot more people with facial hair now.
Yeah. Well, baldness was definitely not in a long time ago.
I don't know, man. I don't know. It's always
Bruce Willis started it.
Yeah.
I think so. He was my inspiration.
Picard. You know,
when I saw Bruce, I was like, all right, it's time. Because I was losing it. It was so hard to do. And I'm like, all right, it's time.
All right.
It's time.
All right.
But
Connery, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah. Well, it's great to have you here. I'm excited to get into some fun topics. As I always like to say, you know, the purpose of this is really to help people think about conversations, difficult conversations in a civil way. And in that regard, have meta-politics conversations, how to destroy this us and them mentality, the toxic polarity that exists at all the levels of politics, and to think about really what's needed and to make it a better space for people.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it. We have so much more in common than we have in terms of difference, and yet that doesn't seem to be what people focus on.
Right.
And so I love the kind of basic premise of your show. I'm just trying to have conversations so we can get to know each other better and build more dialogue, and also build more opportunities for people to feel like they can access their government and really engage with their government.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I should first congratulate you on a pretty big accomplishment. It took some years, but a new bill has been passed.
Yeah, very exciting. This is our SB 54, a sweeping plastics pollution bill that we just got through the legislature after 4 years of work. Lots of ups and downs, and literally up maybe 2 weeks ago, we thought this whole thing was dead, and we finally got it across the finish line. It was the product of many months of really intense negotiation between business and the environmental community, and we ultimately got it passed, with the bipartisan support, and as a result, the plastics measure that had qualified for the ballot is now going to be off the ballot. And now we have a really strong nation-leading policy that will give the producers who have the most control over the stuff that gets out there, the plastic that gets out there, more responsibility associated with the end use of their products. It's a producer responsibility system, extended producer responsibility system. And I got to say, it's an example of what you were talking about earlier. I mean, here we are in this really polarized moment. And yet we were able, here in California, to bring together business leaders, environmental justice folks, and folks from across the business spectrum too. I mean, from the haulers to retailers and grocers and distributors and everybody in between, producers, and then of course local government as well, to come up with a solution that ultimately won support from both Democrats and Republicans. And I was just so proud of that.
Unanimously.
It wasn't unanimous. There
Not
were
unanimous.
there were still some folks who did not support. But nevertheless, we had strong bipartisan support in both houses. Yeah.
Well, that's a good example of the ability to do exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Create the kind of consensus.
It doesn't happen as often as it should, and especially not on really big things, because it's hard. I think you get a lot of vested interests and a lot of people that get kind of stuck in. And it was interesting. I mean, the Howard Jarvis Association came out against it because there's a fee mechanism associated with it. Though, of course, one of the arguments we made all the time, and I think resonated with other taxpayer groups, that actually the status quo is more costly for regular folks. I mean, the League of Cities just came out with a study saying that they're going to have to jack up everybody's waste hauler rates, the rates that you pay for your trash pickup. So that's coming out of people's pockets, partly because we have so little coherence in our waste system. All this junk just keeps flooding. There's no mechanism for accountability or even any responsibility on the part of the producers. So by creating more coherence, it will actually lead to lower rates in the long run. or at least stem the ever increasing rates. And so that has to be factored in as well when people are thinking about the front end costs that might be initially put on some of the new products that are going to be out there as a result of this bill. So as a result, Cal Tax Association, for example, state, they didn't come out in opposition, and they're a really important taxpayer organization. I think they realized that there was a lot of wisdom to what we were trying to do. But because Howard Jarvis came out against, a lot of Republicans got really nervous because they're, it's hard to break with them when you're on that side of the aisle. But some very bold folks saw the value of what we were doing, saw the fact that the Chamber of Commerce was asking for folks to support it, the agricultural community saw that it was really a grand compromise and saw the wisdom of what we'd done, and they voted for it.
Yeah. Well, this sort of goes into this interesting concept of, when you're a senator or you're at any level of politics, there's certain knowledge that you have that no one, or the way that things work, that you just don't know unless you're a senator.
Yeah.
There's just no way for people to understand that what the day-to-day looks like for you, right?
Well, that's true. And I think, and actually, especially in state government, there's so little media attention. I mean, there's so much media attention on the federal.
Right.
And then, obviously, people care a lot about the local because it's so close to them. But the state has a lot of power and a lot of interesting things happening there. And yet, it's amazing how little scrutiny and how little press attention is up there.
It doesn't glitter like the federal politics for some reason. I don't know why.
And yet, especially given how polarized Washington is, there's so much more interesting work happening at the state level. And yet, there's a fraction of the correspondence, a fraction of that. I mean, I don't know. You think about the fact that we live in a state of 40 million people. A few years back, I was in New Zealand. New Zealand probably has 5 million people. And Australia, I went to afterwards, 26 million people, right? So significantly less, both of them, significantly less than we have. And in fact, our economy is far bigger than both. And yet, in both countries, you had several major different news channels, lots of major national newspapers, all of this attention on their own national politics. And yet in Sacramento, I think we're down to like 14 full-time correspondents there now from the media. It used to be about 50 back in the day. It's just extraordinary.
Why is that? Why do you think this is?
Well, I think it's cheaper and easier to just have everyone to have all the news focus on Washington. Because as opposed to having to set up shop in 50 different states. Now, I would argue that you could set up shop in Sacramento and cover California, and there would actually be a lot of interest. But
it is the 5th biggest economy in the world.
Yeah, 5th largest economy in the world, and we're 40 million people just here, and so many people here, right? I mean, there's so many big markets. If you think about San Diego, it's the 3rd largest city in the state. It would be the most important city in most other states, right? I mean, on its own. Sacramento as well is a massive city, but nobody thinks of it as an important city, compared to San Francisco and Los Angeles, right? Yeah. And even within San Francisco and Los Angeles, you've got, all these. You got Orange County, and you got the Inland Empire, you got the South Bay, and you got the East Bay up in Marin. I mean, these enormous megaliths of power and motion and innovation that are happening up and down our state, and yet. I think it's an issue of these national cable news channels that have really honed a certain model, and of course, so much of it's based on trying to stoke pre-existing biases and feelings and
contentiousness, engagement, whatever clickbait you can throw out there to get people to watch it.
Right, and I just think that they've got that model. They're working on it. They're doubling down on it. It works for them. And it's cheap, right? Because you can run the same stories, send it nationwide, as opposed to having a standalone news channel for all these different states.
Well, the opposite of what you're saying is because you're saying it's cheap. The diametric opposite would be it's not profitable, right?
Cable news has been profitable
at the state level,
at the national level, right?
Right. So is it both cheap and not profitable to do that because it doesn't get the kind of attention you think, or is it just because it's less expensive?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, and look, the last thing I want is for us to recreate a Fox News for California, right? Like a Fox News MSNBC battle. Like, I just don't think that would be helpful.
A localized version.
Like I would want more of a thoughtful kind of PBS, right? But then again, maybe that's just not what people. That's not what makes the money, right? So maybe I need to be careful what I wish for. I don't know. I look at other countries, and I mentioned Australia, New Zealand, UK, Canada. I mean, these are all countries from the British tradition where they have for quite some time had a BBC, like a publicly funded, well-resourced, very well-respected public broadcasting system. Which of course we have too with PBS, but it's nowhere near as robust and as well funded, and it's nowhere near as central to the culture as exists in these Commonwealth countries that I just mentioned. And I think the BBC and their equivalents, CBC, ABC, these different countries, raise the bar. It creates a standard for quality of television and engagement and discussion that actually force all the channels up a little bit. Even the private channels. There's just like a higher level of discourse and discussion when they talk about politics. I'm not saying that they're not problems in these countries, but you go to these countries and you watch their news, you watch the way they talk about their politics, and there's more substance than when you turn on our cable news.
Sure.
And our cable news is just based on they'll just parse apart the latest Trump tweet for an hour and just
based on
rap
clicks.
about it. Yeah.
And it's hard because if you look at how they're funded, and a lot of them are strictly funded on advertising dollars, and you could say, well, who's funding them? And you can get down this rabbit hole of your bottom line and your funders are your most important parts of any business. So if that's the case, where do we draw the line between what's allowed there to give people the right information and to not have biased information? Because it seems like that's the most popular thing that people make their public decisions on, based on private news.
Yeah.
It's really kind of weird, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So it's like, okay, the public-private conversation there can go in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's a problem. And it's one of the many things we got to work on.
Yeah.
It's part of what you're combating here at the local level, Evan.
Well, we have there's a lot of information, malinformation out there, or biased information,
right,
or just uneducated information,
right.
It could, or AI,
right. And you're right. We got onto this tangent because you talked about how you can't expect the average person to really understand all that goes behind the scenes when it comes to legislation. I guess what I would say is it's up to us, who are in politics, our staffs, and the reporters, and all of us that are in this world to try to work more to reach out to constituents and reach out to the public and explain what we're doing and bring people in. And then I would say on the reverse, just to say to folks, this system is a lot more accessible than you think. I think a lot of people look at the news. It looks very far away. It looks like something that they can't influence. It's just kind of off in the distance. And yet, every elected official and their staffs are from a community. They come from a place. I grew up here in Santa Monica and served on the school board here. Raising my son here. I'm a member of this community. All my staff are members of this community. There are lots of ways to get to know an elected official staff, local elected officials, serve on a commission, get involved with a campaign, show up at meetings. Get yourself, join a Democratic club or Republican club, whatever it is. There's all sorts of different ways to engage in the system. If you want to, it's there, it's accessible, much more, I think, than people realize.
Well, it's easy that requires effort. What doesn't require effort is reading something you disagree with and then retweeting it or resharing it and going, this sucks. It's an outrage.
Yeah.
That doesn't require effort.
A lot less, yeah, you're right.
Well, then you just get into the pool of nonsense,
right,
of whatever, but it takes work. You have to make a commitment. You have
to
go
down algorithmic rabbit holes.
Which is unfair. It's one of the things I've actually thought about for even social media companies. It's like they should bias good things. There should be, if you're that powerful, you should have the algorithm that says, you know what, this is wonderful news. It's pure goodness. It helps humanity. We have a little part of the algorithm that puts that up to the top, not just things that people click on. Yeah. Because this is part of that public-private. It's like private business influencing the public sphere.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And, obviously we've got, appropriately strong rules protecting freedom of speech and all the rest. But I do think we're getting to a point where we've realized that the way the unregulated flow of speech on social media, I think we need to figure out a way to push the social media companies to steer away from misinformation at the very least. Opinion is important, but misinformation and the constant negativity that seems to dominate a lot of people's feeds, it's not helpful.
And vitriol.
Yeah, vitriol, violence.
You can't
It's
get
not
anywhere with
helpful.
that.
It's not helpful.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay. Well, I was going to ask you what is misinformation, but let me I like asking this more. What is a fact?
That's a great question. I mean, it's something. It is something that is absolutely grounded in truth. Ideally, it's something that is evidence-based, demonstrable, provable. I know, of course, there are some facts that are harder to prove than others, but a statement that is grounded in truth and that's provable.
Yeah,
I would say
objectively,
yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah,
that without any, it can't be misinterpreted. I imagine.
Sure, of course, lots of facts are misinterpreted.
Well, of course. Because I don't think people have the same definition of a fact, which is why I ask it. You ask one person one definition, and then you ask someone else a different, and their experience of that is different. And then you say, well, what are the things you read? Are you basing your anger on your definition of what a fact is? Because that's a pretty pure definition of a fact, right? When you read certain news and you get outraged, are you looking to make sure that what you're getting outraged on are actual facts that are in line with your definition of a fact? Or are you just getting the emotional portion of it, then sharing it to a million people and quick to, confirm your own biases by calling up your best friend who believes exactly like you do and go, can you believe this is going on? Right. This is crazy.
Right.
No,
I think you're right. It's usually the latter now. And as we've been discussing, right, the social media bias is toward doubling down on that approach, right?
Yeah.
And, what's that great film that just came out, the documentary, The Social
Dilemma.
Social Dilemma, yeah. It does a great job of spelling all that out.
Yeah. For
folks who are interested in those.
He was on Joe Rogan too.
Oh, okay, good.
And they speak at length about it.
Yeah.
It is really interesting.
Yeah.
Actually, that's how I found out about the one he did with Daniel Schachtenberger. They mentioned Braver Angels guys.
Oh, okay.
Who I met with
that's
last
how they
week.
Came on. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I heard them and I went and reached out to them because I was like, this is a great mission.
Yep. We need more of that.
Their goal is to bridge red and blue through civil discussion and understand, which is the purpose of this too, to understand that our values and aspirations are largely the same.
Yeah.
But our approach and the narratives we read turn us into enemies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the media turns us into enemies, unfortunately, in a lot of ways.
As a business model sometimes,
Yeah.
It's because that's what, as you say, that's what gets people agitated and excited. Now, I mean, look, now let's be fair. There are also a lot of really great, objective, hardworking, balanced journalists out there that are just struggling under
mindful journalists.
Under this and struggling in this environment where their entire profession has been attacked and they're just trying to keep their head down and keep reporting the facts, like so many have before, and yet it's becoming increasingly difficult for them. It's sad. Real journalism. And honestly, it's part of why I subscribe to a couple print newspapers. I encourage other people to do the same. We got a great. We actually have amazing, something like 3 or 4 print news right just for Santa Monica alone. Obviously, Daily Press.
We're very active here. There's so much here.
But we need to keep supporting local and national press. Yeah. Not just just because there's a firewall. Please, consider the damage that is done when we don't step up and help to fund media, good high quality media together. Just to give you one little example, by the way, Evan, it's really interesting. I heard not too long ago a study that was done that showed that in those communities that don't have a local newspaper, the bond agencies charge those communities a higher interest rate to borrow for municipal bonds and for school bonds and water bonds and all that kind of thing. There is literally they give you a slightly higher interest rate because they're taking on a higher risk. Because when there's a strong local press, the city council members and the city government, the school district knows that there's someone watching over them.
There's more transparency.
There's more transparency. There's more scrutiny.
Wow.
There's more attention to detail and less likelihood for there to be a mistake or fraud. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting.
So we actually pay a cost as a society when we don't have a strong press.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's super interesting. That's wild. Well, and I think that kind of goes into the idea that like so many people, like even on this last ballot a few weeks ago, or a month ago, whatever that was, people call you and they're like, who should I vote for?
Right.
And it's like, if I tell you who to vote for, you're not being a citizen, a real citizen here, right? I can tell you who to vote for. I'm happy to do that. I'd love to see the people that I like win, but now you're not participating in the democracy. And part of your job as a citizen, I believe, is to understand how things like that work. What percentage of the population do you think understands how state bonds work?
Yeah, not super high. But look, okay. I agree with you on one hand, but I want to push back a little bit on the other, which is to say that not everybody, I don't know a lot about types of surgery. I trust and respect people to go to school and learn a lot about that subject matter, and I'm going to go into the hospital when I need it, God forbid, or when my family needs it, and trust them to do the right thing, while also trusting but verifying, I suppose, making sure that I'm learning as much as I possibly can. I don't think we should expect everybody and their mother to get into the details of bond financing. But I do think it's part of why we need good journalists.
That's an extreme. That's probably at the extreme of knowledge that you have.
But it's part of why we need good journalists out there who do understand bond financing, who can ask the tough questions. And, of course, we also need smart, wise elected officials and government bureaucrats stepping up to play those roles as well. So, I think you should – when people ask you who they ought to vote for, of course, I'd rather them do the research on their own. But if you think about it, what are they doing? They're going to go online and read a couple, I don't know, the Daily Press endorsement or the LA Times endorsement or the Democratic Party's endorsement. In some respects, they're turning to you because they know and respect you. They know that you follow this stuff. They know you know people and you've got a better access to the system maybe than they have.
Sure.
And they trust your opinion. They may not take every single vote suggestion you give them, but I think they know that you – I don't know. I would take it as a sign of respect to you that they're asking you this, that they do want to participate. Listen. I'm sure that if you were to give them 20 of your votes, they're not going to vote with you 20 times. And they might vote with you 15 times or maybe even 19 times. But these are independent people making their own damn decisions, right? But they do take you into account.
Yeah.
You're going to be a factor in helping them determine their decisions, just as endorsements are a factor, just as mailers are a factor. And we can't possibly know everything there is to know about every race. I know a lot more about the system maybe than most, and yet there's sometimes I'm really torn. The two judges, for example, running, I don't know these people. I can read a certain amount about their judicial philosophy. There's only so much I'm going to do to research. So I end up kind of relying on proxies as well to help me better determine who I'm going to vote for as well.
Well, and it's also, this may be something that is somewhat asymptotic to be able to solve, right? Like you'll never get to a place where there's a pure amount of knowledge transfer.
Exactly.
Right. So
that's my point, I guess, in the end of the day.
That's impossible. But
look, the flip side of the coin is much more dangerous than what you just described, which is to say only people who really are fully informed end up participating, and then as a result, you end up getting a very small portion of the population.
Right.
It really and then decision making ends up focusing on the elite. We've got Australia
or the most educated.
Or the most educated.
Yeah.
Or the most fired up.
Yep.
This is one of the problems of the primary system in a lot of other states.
Well, that's the number one, isn't it? Like the squeaky wheel.
It's all the squeaky wheels that end up, so these members of Congress that are saying all this crazy stuff right now, when you understand who it is that they owe their elections to, you start to understand why it is that they're so wild.
Yeah.
And it's because they're really focused on the partisan primary voters in their gerrymandered districts back home that are actually a very small portion of the population, but they're super fired up.
Right.
And as a result, they're incentivized to go off the deep end, with their messaging and their positions. because of that small portion. So,
and that portion is sadly what most people, I believe, think is the reality.
Yeah.
Is that extreme messaging. And this gets to that sort of point that we've talked about before, is like when you make a policy. I'm like in customer service mindset. When you have a policy, and let's just say it's, I don't know, climate, whatever, and Ben Allen, if you vote a certain way on this policy, Ben Allen supports this policy, or Ben Allen voted against this policy. Right. So the people going against you who want you to lose, or would say that, I can't believe he voted against this policy. And you didn't necessarily for what I'm talking about, but the sake, they don't realize how much is behind that that you're voting against. It's all the other stuff.
And I'll tell you, Evan, I run into this problem a lot, actually, because the process of crafting bills is messy, right? Think about your conversation. I don't know, conversation you've had with your wife recently, where maybe you're trying to make a decision about where to have your kid go to school, or you want to remodel the house or something. It's oftentimes a long negotiation.
Right.
Where you have many conversations. The legislative process involves votes along the way, and each vote is part of that negotiation. And just because you disagreed with going with this contractor doesn't mean you don't want to do a remodel. You just that particular contract may not have been the one that you thought was wise. You were interested in a slightly different approach, and yet the vote that's on the record is you voting against that contractor, or voting against that particular bill in that particular form. Right. And that is one of the many challenges of serving in this position, because you have to cast a yes or no vote on these bills.
Yeah.
And sometimes you may love the idea or the core thrust of a bill, but there may be a lot of details in there that give you pause. Yeah. If you just vote for that bill without asking any questions or any caveats, you are, for better or for worse, rubber stamping what's in the bill. What ends up happening, of course, is that people say, well, I'll vote for this to continue the conversation, but I reserve the right to not vote for it later. That's confusing to people, sometimes in the general public, but within our system, it's important. But what ends up happening sometimes is that sometimes when things get really toward the end of a vote, where it's literally, this bill's either going to go into law or not, or it's going to go to the governor's desk or not, then you have to kind of make a decision ultimately. Okay, am I going to? I believe in 60% of what's in this bill, but I really am having a hard time swallowing 30%.
Yeah.
Am I going to take the decision to vote for it anyway?
Yeah.
And that becomes a really tough thing, and it can be so easily characterized out in the public when people don't understand all that went behind.
Yeah.
And it's part of
Ben Allen's responsible for this one aspect of a thing, and then they'll focus on the aspect of the bill.
Yeah.
Right. And be like,
or they'll focus on the part of the bill that everyone can agree with.
Yeah.
And he voted against X, Y, and Z. Well, whereas I had no problem with X, Y, and Z. In fact, I like X, Y, and Z. The problem was J, K, and L that were also stuck in the bill.
But the bill doesn't read well with J, K, and L.
Right.
The bill says climate bill.
Right.
So now, whether you vote for or against it, I think that's one of the things that many people don't know is the process and what's behind it.
By the way, sometimes I just go up. I've said, this is important enough. I'm still going to vote for it, even if because every bill ultimately is a product of compromise. I mean, I brought up the plastics bill I just worked on. In order to pull together all those people, everybody had to make a certain compromise. There are a lot of people in business who think the bill go way too far. Certain people in the environmental community thinks that the bill doesn't go far enough.
Yeah.
And there were people who were complaining on both sides right up to the end, raising concerns. Oh, I wish we'd done this. I wish we'd done that instead. And in the end of the day, you could parse these things apart till the cows come home, and then never do anything, because in the end of the day, you also have to pull together enough of a coalition that really is broad based to get bills across the finish line. And Mike Feinstein actually just wrote an interesting piece to certain Greens, for example, who obviously are hardcore environmentalists. Who I tend to agree with on a lot of environmental issues, who were complaining about the bill, not being as strong as they would have liked to have seen. And Mike makes the point: look, guys, it's either it's either this or nothing at all. There was a ballot measure out there, but for a lot of reasons I can get into, we thought that at the end of the day, after the opposition was going to spend $150 million kicking the crap out of the ballot measure, the polling data that I saw suggested it was going to eventually lose. So having a really strong bill that might, that goes 90% of the way is still such a win. But yet there are some people out there who focus on the fact that it didn't get you to 100%. And
Right.
So
Well, that's sort of
that's the challenge of the job too.
Yeah, you have to make something to get you. You need the activation energy to get you to, say, the 80% mark.
Yeah.
And you say, well, was this good? Is this good enough to get us there so we can make refinements over time?
Yep.
And that's sort of with any decision you have to make in business, like even like starting a company.
Yep. Totally.
We call it an MVP.
Totally.
Right.
And of course, the negotiations are fascinating, right? Like when we came out with our bill after all these negotiations, we got. I would argue that we got to 88, I don't know, 90% of the way, let's say.
Yeah.
And then some environmentalists held out and actually arguably pushed us to 95%. Good for them, right? I mean, I think I was so worried that the whole thing was gonna collapse as a result, but they held out, and ultimately we really finessed the language, and we got to a point where it got even stronger than it was, and that was fantastic too. But you never quite know. I mean, these negotiations are so delicate, and when you got so many people riding on that surfboard together,
Yeah.
any little change could upset the balance.
Yeah. And, one of the things I've kind of thought about also at the local level is, whenever there's this polarity on a certain issue, maybe it's a development, maybe it's something here in Santa Monica, whatever, right? And they tend commonly to become pretty toxic sometimes,
Yeah.
and that's pretty frustrating. But, at the end of the day, there's a matrix of possibilities and decisions. You say, okay, these are the things that we're approving, and this is the possible outcomes, right? And there's a cost benefit to any decision that you have to weigh out.
Yeah.
You could put that into a table, say, here is the 100 things we've considered, and like you said, we agree with 88% of them. 12 of them are not good. But then you have to make the decision. Is it better? Now I have to make a vote. That doesn't mean I agree with it 100%.
Right.
It means that I agree with enough of it that it's the right decision. Not that every single aspect of this is perfect.
Right.
But if you'll get those 12% of people who then hate you for it.
Right. Now, ideally, sometimes at least, you can, and this comes down to both relationships and spidey sense. Sometimes you're in that situation, the 88-12, and you can say, look, this is a good project. Let's go, but let's spend a couple minutes with the proponents on the 12 and see how many of those we can cut down. Are these things that you and I may hate totally essential for the proponent, or are they things that we could finesse or reduce or change or alter to make less odious?
Yeah.
And I think that's also part of that needs to be part of the story too. Not just sort of accepting things at face value where you're having to swallow a pill in order to get all these positives. Is there a way to avoid swallowing the pill while still getting the positives? And sometimes the answer is no, but that's part of where real good negotiations come in.
Or at least in the time allotted, right?
Yeah.
But this comes down to like if people don't read the contract.
Right.
Right? If people don't know what that decision-making process is, and maybe there's opportunity for transparency there in some way where it's like, look, we evaluated all these things and we're people, we had to make a decision.
Yep.
I had to pick yes or no. The choice is binary.
Yep.
The list of the matrix of what this is and how it affects things is virtually infinite.
Yeah.
We've been able to identify 100 scenarios in this matrix, but I have to make a yes or no choice.
Right. That's right.
And that's tricky.
Right. It's very tricky. It's part of what makes being in these positions difficult, and of course I've now had to make literally thousands. And I can't. It's scary for me because I pride myself on being someone who tries to take my job really seriously and be thoughtful and well researched and well grounded in the decisions that I make. But I can't. I've literally cast thousands and thousands of votes since I've been in the Senate, and I can't look you in the eye and say that every single vote was as well informed as I would have liked. And so that does become scary for me. I rely on organizations that I trust. I rely on colleagues who I trust. I rely on my staff. I try to read as much as I possibly can. I rely on journalism, but that's another part of the story. It's part of why we need a robust civil society and a robust journalism class that's always asking tough questions and making sure that stones are being overturned, and because the decision makers are being asked to make a lot of decisions that are never going to be as well informed as they would ideally be.
God, thousands.
Yeah. Oh yeah, thousands and thousands.
Thousands of times you've been through that sort of like struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. You get hardened a little bit through that process, and I do think you end up. I think over time you start to understand. Okay, which of my colleagues can I trust? Right? I mean, which of them have delivered in the past? Who if they tell you this is a good bill and I'm going to address this, and this, you know that they're actually telling you the truth.
Yeah.
Some much more than others.
Right.
Similar with organizations. I mean, there's some organizations out there whose perspective not only do I just agree with, I trust them. They've got good lawyers. They've got good vetting, and so if they sign off on a proposal, I'm much more comfortable signing off on it as well.
I see.
So, but and then that's also why we all have staff. We've got staff who've got distinct portfolios. I've got a staffer that will work on a whole bunch of different issue areas, and they'll come to me with recommendations and suggestions, and I'll sometimes rap back and forth with them, ask them questions, and we'll go back and forth over the decisions that I have to make.
So the information that gets presented to you comes in. I mean, it must be a wealth of information from a variety of.
It is.
I was going to ask, like, where do you get your news from? In a sense.
I mean, I'm old school. I love print news. I literally my colleagues tease me because I love taking pictures of articles and sending them to them, and everyone gets their news from their phones, but I find it a really dissatisfying experience. I mean, I don't mind flipping through an article on my phone from time to time. I do all the time, but then then someone pings you halfway through the article. Next thing you know, you're down some rabbit hole responding to a text, or an email comes in, and or there's a lot of clickbait. I just love having my newspaper, putting my phone aside, and just focusing on my paper. Yeah. So when I'm down here, I get the LA Times. When I'm up there, I get the Sacramento Bee. I obviously love reading the daily press as well. When I go out for a walk or take my kid to school, I'll pick up a copy of the local press and SMDP, and I also we can get the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle up in the Capitol too. So I just love reading the print stuff. Now that being said, there's some really great journalism online too. Politico is fantastic, and Cal Matters is really really great. Those are two really top-notch pieces of journalism that you typically can't get in print. But yeah, I try. I love NPR. I love PBS. I love the Sunday morning news shows, NBC. Meet the Press, that kind of stuff. But I do try to keep my cable news intake. I don't know. I watch CNN from time to time, and but I don't know. It just one of the other things I like about PBS NewsHour, for example, right, is it's a distinct presentation of the news that's curated. They're not just kind of making it up on the fly, trying to fill the time. Yeah. Which is, I think, you find a lot on cable, a lot. Yeah. Similarly with print articles, right? They're when they're well written, you really get all sides covered, and it's presented in a very receivable format. Yeah.
It's hard to find.
Yeah.
It's hard to find. And I think with all that, we've talked a bit about like the, information and being able to determine what's misinformation and what's real, what's not real in this day and age. It's tricky to kind of remove bias and make a very well-informed decision. This is obviously one of the improvements that we can make.
Yeah.
In general, when you look at the distance between government and its people, whatever that distance is in your mind, like the connection that needs to be made to rebuild trust, and to make it feel like, okay, well, things are working well, and maybe that's never entirely achievable. I don't know. It's very tricky being involved in government. What do you see that the opportunities for improvement are, for reform? What are some of the top things to say? These overhauling changes need to be made so that we can get to a place where people are trusting that the people they're electing are there for them. And on top of that, I'll say one of the awards I know you won was a Clean Money Award. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if any of that, but that's a cool little...
let's talk about that. Yeah, I mean, so some of the stuff we've been talking about, so robust journalism, I think having just good quality oversight from the fourth estate, the fifth estate, which estate? The fourth estate. From journalists, right? From the press. making sure that people are being asked tough questions and that there's scrutiny and there's also a better, higher quality flow of information between the public and decision makers and everywhere in between. I think money. You raised the point. It's got a pernicious role in the process, particularly when there isn't enough scrutiny and enough attention being paid. So campaigns are increasingly expensive. But even there, it's not even. It's interesting. Some people think, well, why do you keep raising money once you've won? If you've got relatively, obviously you got to run for re-election, but it's much easier to run for re-election than when you first run. Well, our party leadership and our legislative leadership asks us for very substantial contributions every year. And that's done to help the broader cause. But that money is then used to help fund other campaigns around the state. And it's important to give because it helps to, it plays a role in your position, in the elected official's position, what sort of staff and offices and chairmanships and committee postings you get and all that kind of thing. And I don't mean to say that it is quite as quid pro quo as it may initially seem, but there is a certain seaminess to it that bothers me, and I have to live in that space. It's part of why I've been working so hard for many, many years on clean money issues, Common Cause, League of Women Voters, California Clean Money Campaign. They work on transparency. They work on trying to just get more controls over the money that's in the system. More focus on the corrupting influence of a lot of special interest money that floods the system, trying to influence. And it's a real problem. I mean, I work very closely with those guys. In fact, I'm really proud that California Clean Money Campaign, they ranked the legislators every 2 years. And I've literally been number one in the legislature on their issues since I started, because I feel so strongly about this particular issue. I think that we're very money is a pernicious force in the system. So I think we need to keep moving in a clean money, campaign finance reform, transparency direction. I think that will also help to rebalance things so that people will feel that ultimately the decisions that are being made in their interest as opposed to special interests.
Right.
I also think we need some electoral reforms. I mean, I certainly like the fact that here in California we've been working hard to make it easier for people to participate in a safe and fair but also transparent way. So instead of making it harder for people to register to vote and participate in the process, we've been making it easier while still having really strong anti-fraud protections. But I also think that that looking at things like some of the structural issues that we have nationally, I think the partisan primary has caused problems. That gerrymandering has a whole set of issues. As I've said before, I want to see some more kind of publicly funded or foundation funded independent news that people can draw upon. And then I would also say we need robust participation, and I guess I just ask your listeners, if be an active citizen, be engaged. Sure, it takes a little bit more work to show up at an organizational event or to meet an elected official or voice your opinions about something than it does to just retweet something. But it's worth it. I mean, our whole society is based on everything that we've come to love about America, our ability to live in freedom and express our opinions and live in safety and have all of this infrastructure where we can live our lives, from parks and transportation to schools and roads and a cleaner environment. All those things they don't just kind of come out of nowhere. They come because we've had an engaged citizenry every step of the way that has gotten involved and put their muscles to the grindstone and try to help make our society better. And we've actually made a lot of things better because people stepped up and engaged and forced the system to change. Look at racial justice issues, for example. But democracy takes constant work, and as much as people would love to just kind of pretend that they don't have to do anything, that the system's going to somehow work itself out, our system really does require participation and engagement. And so I guess I would just ask people, don't be afraid of the system. Don't be so cynical that you don't get involved. I mean, if you think the system sucks, fine, come in and vote for some radicals. Like try to push try to push your own perspective. That's part of the conversation too. But
Plato's quote?
Which one?
It's something along the lines of, for those who think they're too smart to get involved in politics, will find themselves governed by those dumber than them.
Right. That's right. Well, sure.
I love that.
It's a great. I remember that quote. Yeah. And there's other ones that say, like, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Right.
So.
And in Hamilton, they had an interesting line where it's like, it's not in the room where, if you're not in the room where it happens. Right. Where like, there's an element of, if you want to be part of the conversation, then you have to step into the conversation, into the room where the conversations happen, and all politics is local. And how I've seen it and how I've gotten involved, it's like you can go and make change in your local community. Today, your voice is heard. Your vote counts 1-to-1. There's no electoral college. It's very easy, and it's super, super accessible. And I think that's that kind of reform to get people just to like, it's almost should be part of school. Like, okay, you have to go participate in one thing you care about in a public service level as part of the curriculum. And of course, an emotional IQ class.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. But don't be afraid of getting involved. I think that's it's actually really interesting. It's meaningful, and getting involved doesn't mean you're on the plane with the president, prepping him for speeches. Getting involved in a neighborhood council, getting involved with a neighborhood organization, stepping up and serving on your kid's school PTA, getting onto a commission, joining a local political club. Going to hear a talk and asking elected officials some questions. Going and lobbying an elected official staff. I mean, running for office yourself. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways.
Well, that's your example,
to do this.
right?
Yeah.
You felt inspired enough to be where you're at.
Yeah, but I wasn't just. I absolutely, but I also was doing a lot of other things too. I think I was all part of. I didn't just want to run for the office for the sake of it. I gotten really excited and engaged in policy making and. So, in fact, part of what happened with me was that I when I was at law school, I became the student member of the Board of Regents for the University of California, which was a fascinating experience, and I just loved that experience so much, and I felt like I wanted to keep it going, and so that was not an elected position; it was an appointed position, but it definitely got me in the mindset where I wanted to come home and run and get engaged here.
Yeah.
So it's been a great experience ever since. I mean, certainly there's been some ups and downs, but it's been a really meaningful, worthwhile experience for me.
Yeah. Well, I think and seeing people like yourself apply themselves in a way, and of course, you have a particularly impressive education as well.
Santa Monica High School, man.
Santa Monica High School, followed by Harvard, Cambridge, Berkeley.
Yep, that's right. Yep. See, we got it. It was my public SMMUSD education that gave me the preparation for it. Yeah.
Followed by these boards and commissions and the inspiration to keep going, right?
Yeah.
But that's a mindset of public service, which I know you have because, well, one, I've heard you talk about it before, but two, I know you as a person.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's a little bit of element of public service that if everyone just gets a little bit, they start to learn how to make the change, to give people the space to win sometimes too, right? Sure. Like you can't win everything. So even when you get involved, to be able to get into that dialogue, to see that there's a lot of sides, these things are complex.
Sure.
There's no real right answer most of the time.
Right.
So there's a learning of how to deal with rejection in a sense. Well, I really wanted that, but I didn't get it this time.
Right. Especially, as they say, when we're involved in the business of having to govern for everybody, right? Having to bring together vast groups of people. Because everyone, I think, thinks about the law or policy how it affects them and the people that are close to them. But there's a lot of other people in our society, and we got to be thinking about them too.
Right.
And
state and nationwide, right?
And global. So how do we craft solutions that really are in the best interest of everybody? And as you say, there's no easy answers at all.
No. Well, one of the
and social psychology is such an important part of this.
Oh yeah. And fascinating stuff too.
Yeah.
In the kind of recent Supreme Court decision on Roe versus Wade, this is obviously a sensitive issue for lots of people. But the thing that I always I guess where my head goes with with this conversation is this is one of many potential issues and past issues as well that we think about the what is this predicated on, and a lot of it seems to me it's what power should be given to the federal government and what power should be given to the states.
Right.
That's sort of like the underlying thing, right? It's not always no, don't do this thing, but rather the state should have the power. At least that's the narrative.
That's the narrative. I mean, you could say that about the Civil War too.
Sure.
And yet we also know there was a lot more besides just federal state tension.
Sure, of course. So without getting into it, the thoughts on Roe versus Wade, the question is, again, let's stay kind of meta on the conversation of what power should be given to states and what power should be given to federal government. Where do you draw that line and say, you know what, I get it, that is a state issue. Is alcohol one of those things? Like alcohol, except for in New Orleans, right? Did New Orleans figure out how to somehow not have an 18-year-old drinking age?
I think they finally were forced up to 21 because the federal government said they wouldn't give them highway funds.
Highway funds, yeah.
That's right. So while alcohol was technically a state decision, they were basically forced into.
So no one followed that path.
National policy.
But that's sort of like we'll say Roe versus Wade is like one end of like the very intense conversation. Around, and the alcohol is on the other side where it's like. Maybe it's not all the way to the other side, but it's somewhere in the middle. What do you think?
It's a tough question. I mean, this, of course, has been this is what constitutional scholars have been grappling with for a long, long time. I mean, I think ideally we'd all be able to come together with some basic principles and norms that we can all agree upon as a nation. And while still allowing for a certain degree of innovation at the state level. People kept talking about states as the incubators of democracy. I think Brandeis writes about this in one of his decisions a while back, and that there's all these interesting policy ideas that come from the local level, come from the state level. I guess, look, I mean, I'm a liberal, right? So I kind of hearken back to the old system that where a lot was being driven by the feds, and a lot of the states were really standing in the way of progress from my perspective, civil rights being a very clear example, and that there was a certain consensus and there was an ability in Washington where people could actually get things done. Now, of course, things are so broken in Washington, and the states, so that would argue for more state power. The flip side, of course, is some of the states are going so far off the deep end. So as much as I am really statriotic and California guy and love much of what we're doing. I will say that not only are there a lot of other states that I think are off in the wrong direction, I would also say that one of the other problems with the trajectory of our politics is that what used to be that both parties were truly national parties, and when there'd be an election, the states were nowhere near as locked in terms of the electoral college. They'd vote for one party one year, another party the other, and they'd flip around. And there was a certain degree of regionalism, but not as locked in as we see today. And what you've seen is partly as a result of the polarization and the regional aspect of the polarization, is that not only are these states kind of locked in terms of the electoral college, but they've now also become very heavily Democrat or Republican in the state government. And I think that leads to excess too. I think that I don't think it's good for government, as much as I'm a proud Democrat and like the Democratic Party, want to keep seeing Democrats getting elected. I do think that the system works better when there is a rational, sane dialogue going on between the two parties, not only in Washington, but also in the state capitals. And partly because of Donald Trump, the Republican Party here in California has done so poorly because people don't want to have anything to do with that brand here. Yeah. But I think we've lost something as a result. I think there are the system works better if you've got Democrats and Republicans who can work together in the state capitals. And I think sometimes the excesses of one party's extremes. I mean, look what's happening right now in Florida. It can lead a state in a dangerous direction. I think you're seeing this in a number of states around the country right now in ways that are not helpful. So I don't think there's an easy answer to your question. I mean, I guess I wish that we could all see more eye to eye so that we could have a stronger federal approach, allow for a certain amount of innovation and flexibility at the state level. It's good to have a different culture and different vibe, but I don't think it's good for our country to have such wildly opposite policies from state to state. And I think with abortion, on environmental issues, I don't think this is a good path for our country. And so, as much as I'm a proud state legislator, and I like I want my state to continue to lead. I wish we could find better consensus nationally, so we wouldn't need to have be fighting these battles to protect what we used to think were basic American rights that we're now having to codify here in California.
Yeah. Oh man, it's quite a path we have ahead.
It's tough. It's tough. I mean, the abortion thing, and then this environmental stuff too. I mean, the fact that we've now this court just decided to hobble the federal government's ability to fight climate change, the great existential crisis of our time. Yeah. And as it is, there wasn't enough tools in the toolkit, and now they just took away the most important tool there was, which is to use the Clean Air Act to give the EPA the power that it needed to fight climate change. So terrible decisions from my perspective, and really setting us back. And they're also going to continue this polarization between the states. You're going to have California kind of continue to go out, double down, and then other states doubling down in the other direction. It just feels like we're just moving in opposite directions, and it's just not healthy.
So what is it that people can do who are super supportive of one side or the other that didn't get their way on Roe versus Wade or anything else that's important to them? I mean, can they overturn certain policies in their state by getting their ideas on the ballot and getting enough signatures to start doing stuff like that? And if enough people, because I think one of the conversations is like, well, that's not representing the populace,
right?
And we don't know that for sure, of course, right? You don't know for sure whether that's true, but I would think it's true.
Well, the polling suggests that
the polling suggests that it's true, but in order to make a difference, the polling doesn't really matter. The people need to say that is true for us. We're in state,
right? And one of the problems is that we're constricted by these systems, right? Like the redistricting, the inequities of the Senate, right? The fact that the U.S. Senate gives every state the same amount of representation, even though Wyoming has literally half of the number of people that live in my state Senate district. Right. So I'm one of 40 senators here in California, and yet my district has double the number of people that live in Wyoming.
But Wyoming has the coolest name for a capital.
That's right.
It's got Cheyenne.
That's right. And their biggest city is Casper, which I think is such a cool name too.
That's a good one too. They got good names.
Yeah, they got good names, but they got way too much representation in the U.S. Senate if you think about it from an equity perspective.
Yeah.
So. Now, I don't think that's ever going to get solved. I mean, to be honest, at least not in our lifetime, Evan. But I do think that helping to build capacity within other states to start, look at what happened in Georgia. Look at what happened in Georgia last election, right? I mean, here's a sate that's always been very, at the heart of the Confederacy, pretty behind the times on a lot of racial equity issues. Had elected some people to office that were pretty problematic, and yet, had traditionally, they'd voted for Trump in 2016. This go round, people organized. People really organized. They went out. They identified the fact that there's a lot of demographic shifts happening in and around Atlanta. Lots more immigrants, people coming in from different parts of the country, an increasingly empowered black population that had always been so marginalized. And they sensed this, and they took advantage of the moment and got behind Stacey Abrams and all of her efforts to organize people. And not only did Georgia flip, its presidential vote, but then turned around in a special, not a special election, but not a presidential election, a later election, which is typically a lower turnout election, and voted two brand new people that flipped the balance of power in the U.S. Senate, a young Jewish guy and a black guy. I mean, it was incredible to see what happened in Georgia. So I guess I point to that as an example of how people power and organizing and coming together tactically and aggressively and in an organized, tactical manner can really make a difference. And it's hard work. It's really hard work. I mean, and they had people, waiting in long lines in Fulton County, and they got to witness firsthand how much harder it is for a black person to go cast your ballot in Georgia than it is for people living out in the suburbs where there's tons of polling locations and no lines and all the rest. But that organizing and that that dogged determination that went into that work. And it was driven by the people of Georgia, but there were a lot of people who came in from California to help the effort and came in from all over the place, helped to fund the effort, helped to organize the effort, helped to animate the effort. Yeah. So I bring that up to say that there are opportunities out there, and there are recent examples of how, in spite of all the odds, people power made a difference. And I would argue really helped to save our democracy. I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but after what happened on January 6th, I continue to be so grateful to those organizers in Georgia who tipped the balance there and held firm. And so I just hope people take inspiration from that work and don't get discouraged by all of the roadblocks and the barriers. There are ways to push through. Who would have thought that in that kind of hard kind of old Southern state, a changing state, of course, but nevertheless a state that had never seen this kind of change. Who would have thought that this could have happened? And it was because people came together. And let's take some inspiration from that.
For sure. I think a lot of times it's when I tell people sometimes and they're really passionate about something, and I'm like, well, there's people who care, and then there's people who care enough to put their money where their mouth is, or to put it into action. And I guess part of what it feels like compelled for me to do is to get people motivated at that level where it's like, I know you care. I know, you're in a country that's built on lots of this wacky and awesome system we have to help make things happen.
More wacky than awesome these days, but
more wacky than awesome. but the awesomeness is cool. That if you believe in something and you care enough about it, you can make things happen.
That's right.
Right.
That's awesome.
And it's an imperfect democracy, but that the whole point of getting involved is to evolve this beautiful system that's been created for us. And there's so many wonderful things that we have that we take for granted. That you sort of get just used to, that we're complacent with, of how good the quality of life is here compared to, all you have to do is travel and see that, I forgot what it is, but it's something like the lower class of America is still within the top 5% of the world.
Sure. That's all true. Though, if you look at our peer countries, we're on most factors way behind. Much higher infant mortality. So compared to most of the world, yes, you're absolutely right. And we should.
But compared to like France and Germany,
other OECD countries, much higher infant mortality, lower life expectancy, much higher obesity rates.
Sure.
It's much harder if you do grow up in the bottom quintile of our society, the bottom 20%, to make it up the ladder. Much harder here than in other places.
Yeah.
So we have real disparity problems. So yes, we've done incredible things as a country, but we're still we've got these kind of gaping inadequacies that I just hope we can galvanize ourselves to work on.
For sure. I've seen, and it's interesting also from traveling, you realize the government is not its people, right? The way that you perceive a government of another country when you travel to it.
Right. Like Iran, right? People,
I've been to Vietnam and Cuba.
Right, there you go.
Yeah. Okay, and both of those countries, depending on who you talk to, have these ways of thinking about it through history, right? And then you go there and you realize, wow, everyone there is the nicest person and welcomes you with open arms. And Vietnam actually has the second largest population, in Orange County.
Yeah.
And whether you're in Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh, it was just so wonderful and welcoming, and some of these people really don't have a lot at all. Their beds on the floor, they're living in huts, and they love you. And I think that's sort of the difference of perspective that traveling gives you.
Yeah.
it also is part of the difference between, to shift that perspective to the way that the voter tendency turns out, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the most states, it's not about, it's funny, it's like the government of, say, Texas is perceived one way, right?
Sure. Yeah, I get your point.
But all of the big cities vote blue. All
Right.
4 big cities voted blue in the last election, right?
Yep. That's right.
So it's not even a question of government
Right.
or people. It's a question of urban versus rural
Yeah.
a bit.
Yeah.
And I wonder how that factors into the way that people perceive just even Texas. Like, Texas is an amazing state.
Right. Yep.
Forget about some of the policy stuff.
Beef barbecue.
Oh, they got wonderful things there. Yeah. And so, I try. That's part of the divide that I think is sometimes unfortunate too.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. Right. Our governments can sometimes, and our policies can sometimes divide us more than we would naturally be. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, look, you can say the same thing about any war that's ever been fought, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're fighting over. I mean, this was. I mean, there's been, especially during World War I, there was such great work written about how just ridiculous it all was. We were mowing each other down, and yet there were these moments where on Christmas, the German and French and English got up and started playing soccer together.
They came together,
just sort of recognizing their common humanity.
I know that
and
story.
How crazy it was that they were just blowing each other up during every other day of the year.
I think they got all yelled at for that.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
Yeah. They did, but it's become one of the most touching stories of the whole war.
It's beautiful of almost any war.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. And then also they were singing carols across the
common, their common,
across the no man's land.
Mm-hmm.
And they had different lyrics, of course, different
Where
languages.
was that? Was that in France?
It was on the front. Yeah. World War I.
Ben, we can talk for hours, but what do you want to leave people with if you had to tell them? I'm sure you could tell them 100 things, but pick one that's been top of mind that you can, leave people with here today. That's you feel is important.
Yeah. Look, it's a recurring theme in the conversation today. Just first of all, our democracy is so valuable. We take it for granted. We have to engage and we have to keep it strong, and that involves everybody's participation to some extent or another, right? We're not expecting everybody to, you can't have 300 million in the presidency of the United States, but we do need to have everyone step up and be a citizen, and be a participant and have a stake in our democracy, and I would say, don't be intimidated. Figure out a way to connect to our democracy that resonates with you, and if that's just through voting, fine. That's a very important way to participate. It's the most important way to participate. But if the kinds of things that you hear on this podcast, in this conversation, or in the news, or wherever else, inspire you to get more involved, if there's an issue that you care about, get involved with an organization that's doing good work in advocacy in that space. If you got some extra money lying around, give money to an organization that you care about, or to a candidate you care about, or a campaign that you care about. If there's an interesting talk that's coming up, go show up, join a club, If you want to get more involved in your community, there's lots of ways to do it. As I say, a commission, a neighborhood group, and then of course, get involved with the campaign, running for office yourself, but also people running for office need help. I mean, it's never done by the candidate, right? It's always done through a team effort. And if there's someone you believe in or a cause you believe in, get involved in that cause or that candidate's work. The other thing I would say is most elected officials and governments have good staff and don't discount working with the staff. Oftentimes the staff is sometimes just as much, if not more, engaged on a particular issue that you care about than the elected official. And so don't ever forget that. Sometimes people just want to work with, I just want a meeting with the senator, and yet sometimes the staff are actually better placed to solve the problem. Sometimes. Right?
Shout out to your staff.
Yeah, 100%. I got a great team here, and I would just say, any issues that folks have with state government, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office. We've been helping just literally thousands of people over the course of the pandemic. I mean, we were just did an inventory, and it was an extraordinary number of people whose lives we were able to help through just navigating the waters of pandemic insurance, either unemployment, insurance, small business loans, dealing with an issue at the DMV. I mean, the number of issues that people have had to deal with over the past couple of years, we know how tough it's been for folks, and we're always trying to help. And if we can't solve the problem because it's a federal issue or a state, local issue, we can always find a way to help connect people with the relevant and appropriate person. So, don't hesitate to reach out, and before assuming the worst in those people who are in government, it's appropriate to assume the worst about some people, maybe, or at least, but do a little bit of research first, and try to get your research from different sources and not just the same sources. And don't just believe everything that pops up on your Facebook feed. You would owe it to yourself, and you certainly owe it to your fellow Americans to go beyond the Facebook feed, right? To go beyond your Twitter feed and to do a little bit more of a deep dive before forming a vitriolic opinion about someone and spouting it out to everybody else.
Well, I'm sure if people watch this vodcast or podcast, however they get it, they'll see that, for example, Ben is a person with feelings and thoughts and opinions, and there are people behind in that position that are just people.
Yep.
And we're all just people. So
absolutely, it's all people, and we all make mistakes, but I think at least most elected officials actually really care about what people think, because we owe our elections and our jobs to our constituents, and so we're anxious and eager to hear from folks too.
Great. Well, there's a few friends who wanted to say hi today.
Yeah.
They couldn't be here in this moment, but Lana Negretti,
yeah,
Greg Morena, and Dom Bay, who
yeah,
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Send their love.
And Kristen McCowan, you were mentioning too.
And Kristen McCowan, yeah.
And there's an example, right? We were talking earlier. I mean, here we have 4 people who are all, once or former, elected city council members, elected officials, and we were all in student government together at Santa Monica High School in the 90s.
Yeah.
And now, 3 became city council members. I'm in the state senate. I mean, we were just kids growing up, together, working together on, trying to improve life for students, working on the events, but also I remember us all going into lobby for an additional minute of passing period because people were getting in trouble for being 1 minute late to class, and little things like that. Like that seems like a silly thing, right? But that's like a tangible way to help the student community, and we were all working together on that. And now we're all kind of trying to help make our community and our state better. And so that's just an example of how as much as it may not always feel this way, our government really does have a lot of real folks who grew up alongside you that are trying to make a difference, sometimes imperfectly, but trying to make a difference. So,
yeah, even in high school.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Well, thank you, sir. I'd love seeing you, and I loved having you here today.
And speaking, you're a serious public servant in your own right. I mean, we were just talking before. I just want to personally thank you as someone who loves this community and has just seen it get so much more colorful as a result of your work. All the murals that Beautify has done over the years, and you were just such an inspiration in helping to make that happen. Now, I unfortunately I have to fly a lot for work, and sometimes I'm on Lincoln Boulevard, and just the way you've transformed that street, it just changes the vibe. And so I just want to thank you for all the love and care you've put into the arts and just making our community look a little bit better.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot.
Yep.
Well, we always end with a handshake. Good. And, of course, a high five.
High five. There we go. Yeah, excellent. Good, man. Thank you.
I will see you soon.
We'll do this again.
All right, bud.
Yeah.